Welcome, everyone. I'm Tracy Fitzpatrick, and I'll be your moderator today. Thank you so much for joining us here at Netcom Learning, a market leader in promoting lifelong learning, training, and talent development solutions. We are very excited to host today's event, Master Class, Understand the Fundamentals of Architecting on AWS. And presenting today's topic is Terumi. Terumi is an Amazon AAI training consultant and author holding more than 25 years of experience in IT. Her passion for cloud computing developed at a very early age. Being a teenager, she always showed her enthusiasm for understanding the technologies that make computers tick. This deep sense of curiosity on technology led her to achieve all the associate, professional, and specialty certifications and was recognized as an AWS Authorized Instructor Champion. Now, please bear in mind that this is an overview of a very robust topic. We offer a collection of technical and business courses that can be tailored to your specific requirements. If you are interested in a further discussion, you can make an appointment with our learning consultants through our website at netcomlearning.com. Today's session is also being recorded, so you'll get free access to the recording in the next 24 hours via email. Netcom Learning helps customers build innovative learning organizations by achieving a smarter workforce, adapting to change, and driving growth. We do this with a broad catalog of offerings, developing customized learning plans, and our global delivery capabilities. Since 1998, we have been empowering organizations with our managed learning services to help them reach optimal performance results and address challenges. We do have 9 practice areas in which we specialize. They encompass people, process, and technology training. Today's presentation is from the Cloud Practice Area. Netcom Learning offers a comprehensive training portfolio of courses for the topic being covered today. Our upcoming classes include various trainings on the given courses. You can also access a variety of marketing assets, such as the free training and blogs, by clicking on the available event handout. These offerings can be found with a simple search on our website at netcomlearning.com. In today's session, you will learn the fundamentals of building IT infrastructure on the AWS platform. Also, you will explore the best practices and design patterns for architecting optimal IT solutions on the AWS cloud. And now I would like to give you a quick overview of the logistics before we get started. To begin with, you do have the option to view in full screen by clicking on the full screen button on the right side of the GoToWebinar viewer. Simply hit the escape key to exit the full screen. Everyone has been muted except for our presenters. Feel free to submit any questions you have for the presenters here in the questions pane, and we will address them at the end of the session. And to get the best out of today's events, we've included the slides, courses we talk about, and marketing assets in the handout section of your GoToWebinar viewer. You may refer to them at any time to get a better understanding of today's topic. And we do realize that some of you may have to leave early and want to let you know that as you do leave the session today, you will be presented with a short survey. We would like to request for you to take a quick moment to participate in that survey. Your feedback really helps us understand your learning experience and improve our future sessions for you. The survey answers are measured on a scale of 1 to 5, 5 representing outstanding and 1 representing poor. And now I'd like to pass this over to our trainer to present today's topic. Hey, Terumi, thank you so much for joining us today.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's masterclass. The title for today's webinar is Understand the Fundamentals of Architecting on AWS. My name is Terumi Laskowski, and it's my pleasure to be giving this webinar for you this morning. Let's go ahead and see what we're going to do today. All right, so here's the agenda. There are 6 major items today. Let me go over that. Number 1, understand and apply the well-architected framework, right? So we'll figure out what that is all about. Next, introducing the AWS global infrastructure. Number 3, then choosing AWS regions for your architecture from that global infrastructure. And then on number 4, we're going to be hitting one of the major services that AWS offers, which is Amazon Simple Storage Service and Amazon S3 Glacier. So we'll see what that is all about. Then we'll do a little hands-on exercise where we host a static website, and then I'll be open to your questions. Now, between agenda number 3 and 4, we'll take a quick 5-minute break. All right, so let's get started. Here is the first item, which is understand and apply the well-architected framework. So here's the thing. So let's discuss, before we even go to the well-architected framework, what in the world is architecture, right? And you may already know, but let's take a look and see what systems architecture is all about. So here I have a very simple description of what typically what a systems architecture is considered to be. So here, conceptual design, right, that defines the structure and behavior of a system. So hopefully you don't end up coming up with this, leaning tower of Pisa, right? So it provides a blueprint for the system that is to be operational, right? So here are some key components, and there are others, but here's some key aspects about what systems architecture is. The architecture should cover components of the system, right? So there are individual parts of the system that perform specific functions, okay? Then eventually you have to discuss about relationships. That means it describes how the components are connected, both in terms of data flow and also how you control them, the control flow. Then you have the behavior. That outlines how the system operates, right? Detailing the process and operations that will take place under various conditions, and etc. So I'm not going to go over all these, but just understand that that's basically what a systems architecture is all about. So then let's talk about next, what is this cloud architecture thing, right? So architecting on the cloud. So architecting on the cloud, then keeping in mind what systems architecture is all about, you kind of put, in addition to that, the factor about now you're designing for the cloud. So you want to be able to leverage the cloud specific resources, right, to take advantage of those. And then modules to design applications and infrastructures, right? So which are what? Remember we talked about components and such? So you have things like, now your components are not constrained by the physical limitations that you may have in your data centers, on-premises, hardware, and static configurations, which is usually what it is when you have on-premises. So you're outside of the constraints of that. You have very, very dynamic and scalable and highly adaptable infrastructure because they are mostly virtual infrastructures, right? So you have virtual network, virtual storage, virtual servers, right? Things are very much virtual when you move into the cloud. Then businesses, in that case, can innovate faster, right, and scale more efficiently, better meeting the evolving needs of their users. So what does that mean? Well, needs of the users are pretty quickly changing these days, right? So, but if we have physical servers and physical infrastructure, it's really hard to kind of keep up with the changes that are happening in the marketplace and with your end customers. But with the virtual servers, virtual network, you're better able to adapt to those things, right? So it is very flexible, dynamic. That's the hallmark of the cloud. So there you go, right? So that is architecting on the cloud is on top of what we know as a architecture for IT infrastructures, okay? But if you've never been an architect, right, this may still not sound, it's like, okay, I think I understand it conceptually, but I'm not sure if I really got it, right? So if that's you, then I prepared an analogy for you, okay? All right, so if we were to take cloud architecting and looking at it from the perspective, let's say something like city planning, right? So city planning would be a typical use case for an architect, right? So if you are planning for a city. So if we were to say that, well, if we could explain city planning in similar way, you can explain cloud architecture. Let's see what that looks like. So the cloud architecture and city planning, you imagine that you are an architect, like a real architect, architecting for the city. some of the key considerations you may have are these 7 items. So I have the blueprint and design all the way down to city maintenance. Now I have slides for each one of those, so let's go over one by one and see if we can get a better handle of what a cloud architect would do. So the first one is obviously you need to have a plan, right? So you have the blueprint and design. Okay. Well, what does that consist of if you are a city planner? Okay. Well, it requires a master plan, right? So you have to have a good design. Like, what is that going to look like? Do we have any zones? Do we have like residential zone? Do we have industrial zone? Do we have like green spaces, right? That would be great. So in a similar fashion, cloud architect also needs a blueprint, right? That outlines different resources that you may be using, different servers, applications, and the blueprint as to where all these applications will reside, right, in your cloud and how they will be interacting. So that would be blueprint design phase, cloud design strategy. The next part is infrastructure, right? So the city's roads, bridges, transportation systems are very, very similar to what we would consider as an infrastructure for the cloud. But for the cloud, instead of roads and bridges, we have storage, we have compute, we have network, and how they all connect together, right? Different part, and how data moves across these infrastructure. Okay, so that would be the infrastructure component. The next thing you do is security, right? You can't really forget security. So as the city may have walls, they may have gates, they may have cameras, police forces, what have you, right? To protect the, whoever lives in the city, okay? In the cloud, we have something similar, right? Except they're digital, right? So that means maybe firewalls, access control systems, maybe encryption to make sure that, even if the data were to go out, that it would be unusable, etc. So these are some safety components that you would embed into your cloud system to resist unauthorized intrusions and break-ins. Next one here is utilities. Yeah, of course, right? If you're a city planner, you have to plan for things like water, utilities like electricity, waste management, and other things, right? And that is very similar to how clouds managed services are like databases, you have machine learning, you have data analytics, right? So they run in the background supporting the city, right? Or the cloud's core functionalities. And the next one here is the zoning. Remember we talked about in design, we have zoning. Well, zoning regulations, so that would equate to resources and service organization. So just like cities have zoning laws, some places are agricultural, some places are residential, some places are industrial. Something similar happens in the cloud. Resources are organized into different region, different zone, and different network. By the way, VPC stands for Virtual Private Cloud, with specific purpose and rules and tasks. And city expansion, how about that, right? You need to plan for expanding from where you're at right now. So city grows, require more housing, buildings, roads, services. In a similar fashion, cloud also need to consider scaling. So scaling, out, that is to make it bigger, or perhaps sometimes scaling back in to make it smaller, right? To ensuring resource can be increased as demand grows and shrink as demand wanes. And then, last but not least, you have maintenance, right? We can't forget that. So as city needs maintenance, upgrades, regular checks to ensure everything is working okay, right? Make sure, there's no trash piling up on the road, whatever, right? Okay. In a similar fashion, cloud system also needs to be monitored. The systems also probably needs to be updated, periodically, and regular review and maintenance to maintain operational efficiency and make sure that everything's working okay. Great. That's a lot of things. And I hope now you have a better understanding of what an architect would do in a cloud systems. But now that you know that, where do you get started, right? So do you have all this knowledge already, or do you go look up in the reference, or, where do you get started, right? So, so the start part is the issue here. That is there a great template? Is there some somebody else's documentation, or do you have it, already in your head? You've done this before, right? So a lot of times we are kind of struggling to find out, okay, I see what I need to do, but I have no idea where to get started. And that's where the well-architected framework comes in. Okay, so AWS years ago, when they start growing their cloud business, they also came across this issue as to, hey, is there a great like a sample? Is there a great example? Is there somebody who's actually done this before that we can use as a reference? And they looked around and they found none. So they decided to create their own, which is what's called the well-architected framework. Now it's available to you as well. So what is a well-architected framework? It's a set of best practices, right? So best practices usually mean, what do successful companies do in a similar situation? What are they doing? Right? So that's best practices. And strategies for building secure, high-performing, resilient, all that good stuff into the infrastructure for the cloud application. Now, there are 6 pillars to this well-architected framework, and these are operational excellence, security, reliability, performance efficiency, cost optimization, and sustainability. Okay, sounds good. But let's take a look and see what these things are exactly, and I'll kind of show you how you'll be able to use this when you are becoming a cloud architect. So I'm going to be moving to that screen right now. So hang on just a moment. All right, so I hope you see the screen. I have gone to the AWS Well-Architected Framework page. Now, there's a lot of information here, but I'm just going to highlight to you what this is all about. So the link is in the slide, so I hope you'll be able to get access to that later. All right, so here is the 6 pillars that I explained, right? So here are the 6 pillars, okay? Let's take a look at a couple of them because there's a pattern as to the type of data that is provided for you by AWS. Okay, so hang on just a moment. Let's take a look at the operational excellence. That's usually the first one. So here we go. I'm going to click on the HTML. Okay, so now you're at the operational excellence pillar. Okay, now they'll have the introduction for you. Okie dokie. All right, so but I'm going to skip the introduction, and we're going to go to the actual content of it, which is on the left-hand side. So if you look at the left-hand menu, let me go ahead and expand that a little bit. Here we go. So here we're in operational excellence, and you have the we actually have to go to the operational excellence topic. Sorry about that. Let's get to the menu. So it's at the same place. Okay. Now, all of the pillars for the well-architected framework actually has something called the design principles, okay, which is right here. So the design principles are like those blueprints that we're talking about, but they're blueprints for the specific pillar. So this is for the operational excellence pillar. Okay, so let's take a look and see what these things are. So here, let's see if we could fit this whole thing in. There we go. Let me go ahead and reduce that down again. So there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 design principles. Okay, so you have perform operations as code. Yeah, everything is virtual, right, in the cloud, and things can be described like a piece of software source code, and doing operations is no different. So, here is a more detailed explanation what that is. You may want to take a look at that if you're not familiar with something as a code. Infrastructure as code, operations as code, security as code, that's usually the concept. So the best practice is to make it into a piece of software, right? Make it into a source code so that you could do automated operational work, repeated tasks, etc. Next one, make frequent, small, reversible changes. So that's another trend in the cloud, is to do incremental changes in incremental updates, incremental enhancements. Okay, so that's basically what the second design principle is stating. Refine operations procedures frequently. It goes along with the second one, because now we're saying, well, because things change, the way you operate must also change too, right? So the procedures must also keep up with the change. Next one is anticipate failure. That's also true in most of the cloud situation, is that, look, you design for failure so that when it does happen, that it's not going to impact, in a major way to your working systems. And then last but not least, learn from all the operational failures so that you can feed back into your current operations and, make it better, right? So that would be the design principle, okay? And all of the pillars will have the design principles, okay? And then they'll have all the information about what those details are. Then you have the organization, prepare, operate, and evolve, right? So that those are the more detailed information about how do you actually do these things. Okay, so you can go into detail. So let's go with the organization just for kicks. Okay, so organizational priorities, what is that? Okay, so here they're going to give you all the references that you may need to actually do the work, okay, to actually implement your design principles, okay. So there you go. So these are the actual best practices. Now, to show you that, yes, indeed, all the other pillars are just like that, let me go ahead and get back to the well-architected framework here, and let's take the security pillar, right? So let's see it. We'll go to HTML, and here we go. So if we go to the security and foundations, there will be the design principles. So here we go. Let's see. Okay. And as you see, there's the design principles once again. Okay. Then you have all the rest of the information that gives you details about the actual technology that goes into security foundation. But design principles are pretty brief. Okay. Then you have all the definitions, okay, of it. So for example, if you go to identity access management, right, they'll actually give you all the references, okay, to that if you're not familiar with it. So there you go. So that is the well-architected framework, and I hope that gives you a good start, right? If you have never done cloud architecting before, that's where you would go to, right? And like I said, AWS created this from scratch because when they looked around, there were none. Okay, and it's really hands down, AWS is the leader of the cloud provider amongst all the cloud providers, and learning from what they are basing their design on is going to be pretty valuable for everyone. All right, so let me get back into the slides right now. Hang on. Okay, so I hope you're seeing my slides again. So this is where we left it, AWS well-architected framework. All right, so now let's go to the next topic, which is Introduction to AWS Global Infrastructure. Now, this is pretty important because that's what AWS is all about, is that they give you the foundation, the infrastructure in which you can build your architected solutions. Okay, so here we go. So what is AWS Global Infrastructure? So in the moment, I'm going to be showing you the web page that describes in the AWS's own terms what this is all about. So, but just to give you a heads up on that, it's an extensive and geographically distributed network. It's like a global network, okay, of data centers and servers and networks and everything that you could think of that is there, what you imagine as a AWS infrastructure. Okay. Now there are some components here, regions, availability zones, etc., that I want to explain this to you. Okay, but in order to do that, I'm going to be covering the main parts in the whiteboard. So let me go ahead and switch to my whiteboard. Okay, so I hope you've seen my whiteboard. Let me kind of explain first the big chunks, which is the region. So here's the region. And as of this webinar, I believe there's 31 or 32 regions right now, okay? And they're spread across the globe, okay? So, but every single region has similarities, okay? So region is a geographical location where AWS has certain presence, okay? This is where one will create your cloud resources. So this is where you would create your network, your servers, your databases, etc. Right? So, and you don't have to stay in one region, by the way, but I just want to kind of explain to you the components of a region. Okay. So these regions are usually accessible. I mean, they are accessible from the internet. I say usually because what you put on it may not have access to the internet. It's up to you as to how you design your accessibility. So let me just put the internet here. Okay, so they are connected to the internet. Okay. Now each region is divided into what's called availability zones. So let me put availability zones here. Let me just for kicks put 3 availability zones. Okay, so these are called availability zones. Okay, and some regions have fewer than others, usually range from 3 to 6, I believe. Those are some of the bigger regions have 6, some smaller ones has 3. That's, I believe, is usually the case. So if I say their region, I don't know, A, B, and C. So why do we have availability zones? Okay, well, each availability zone is once again, geographical location within a region. And normally, the distance between each availability zone, let's say this distance here, is usually around 3 to 20 miles. Yeah, right, it's really far away. And the reason why they're far away like that is because if something were happening in one region, so let's say A had a major breakage in the water system, and now they're flooding. Okay, let's say that region's flooding, that the availability zone is flooding. Hopefully, the other availability zone within that region is not suffering from that problem, right? So all the infrastructure components are safe and dry, okay? Whereas A may not be, B is okay, and C is okay. So that helps AWS to keep continually giving you available resources even under these some adverse conditions. Okay. So then what are these availability zones and what do they consist of? Well, they consist of, hang on here, let me get my pen. They consist of data centers, okay? So multiple data centers usually maybe around 3 or more data centers. I mean, it varies once again depending upon the location, but that's normally, if I were to say average, okay. Data availability zone will have that. So let's say they all have that, okay. And see here. So let's all make it the same, right? They don't necessarily have to be the same, but sorry, hang on. Let me grab that. Let's see, grab this little thing. There we go. There we go. Here we are, right? Data centers. So let's put that in there. Data centers. So these are highly redundant systems, so that if one breaks, the other one's still there up and running. So there's redundancy within the availability zone. As you can see, you have multiple data centers, and then you have redundancy within the region by having multiple availability zones, and now you have multiple regions as well. Right? So you have, like I said, 31, 32 regions right now. So AWS systems. Okay, so I'll just put N in there because they're still growing. okay? So that you have multiple layers or levels of redundancies. Okay, all right, so now with that given, let me flip back into the screen, the page that has AWS's global infrastructure explained. So I'm going to switch my screen right now. All right, so I hope you are now seeing the AWS Global Infrastructures page. So here, as you can see, it's 32, right? So there we go. So it's 32 launch regions right now. It says each with multiple availability zones. So that's exactly as how I explained it. When you put all the availability zones together, there's 102 AZs, right? And then we'll talk a little bit about what these points of presence are, okay? But if we look at the map, there you go. So let's make this bigger. So this is where your systems can reside. Okay, we'll talk a little bit about, well, which one you choose. That'll be a next topic, but you have the choice. See all these little blue or green circles? Those are all currently active regions. So in the United States, we have North Virginia, which is like the main flagship headquarters, and we have Ohio, then we have Oregon, which is pretty big, then we have Northern California. Now, in the United States, there are two special regions, which are US government regions called Government Cloud. Right there, Government Cloud, okay. Now, I've also worked in Japan, so here we go, Tokyo region, Osaka region. So even though they're regions, they don't necessarily mean that they are separate countries, okay? Because in the US, as you can see, there are multiple regions within the US. So how many countries does AWS span? Well, that's at the bottom here. So you have 245 countries and territories served. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that they all have presence in that country, but they reach over into these countries, okay? So there you go. So this is the vast infrastructure that AWS offers for you, okay? Now, it may not be too clear as to, okay, so why do we have so many regions and stuff? Okay, so we'll talk about that a little bit later on. But just keep in mind that you can always come back here. And by the way, these red spots here, see the red ones? Those are the regions that they're currently creating, like Malaysia, Thailand, and Canada West. And also, we can't forget New Zealand. So there you go. All right, so I'm going to go back into the slides. Okay, so I hope you're seeing the slides right now. Now, we've covered regions, AZs, data centers, right? So we didn't quite cover the edge locations. So what are these edge locations? So the edge locations are a little bit different from regions. And there are tons more edge locations compared to the number of regions, okay? And the edge locations, let me see if I could get that. Yeah, there's like 450 plus edge locations. Okay, so what are those things? Well, let me go back into my whiteboard again. Okay, so you have the regions where one is building your system. So if you have, let's say, a virtual machine, right? So say, I'd like to have some, bunch of virtual machines in my system, and you choose, let's say, North Virginia. Basically you have your servers out here. So if you want some redundancy, maybe you have redundancy in 3 availability zones, right? What have you, okay? But let's say your customers or your end users are located, you're in North Virginia, your customers are, let's say, located in Japan, okay? Let's just for kicks, okay? So your customers are out here in Japan, okay? And you're trying to provide them some, let's say, streaming media, right? Maybe music, maybe video. And for folks from Japan, going all over, all the way to North Virginia, going over the Pacific Ocean and the United States, right? That's a long haul. So there may be some latencies, that is the delays in the file being sent to all the way to Asia, which may not be desirable. So you may say, is there any way that we can get rid of this redundancy? And the answer is yes, right? And the answer is yes, because AWS actually has these things called the edge locations. So the edge locations kind of work like this, and they're, like I said, 240 plus. edge locations, right, where your content can be cached. So let's say you cache the content. So now the data can be sent from where it is the closest to the end user, like that, right? Instead of sending something from way over there. Okay, so it'll be like a two-step process. You have your data from the source into the cache and into the cache to the hands of the user. You see? So that's going to take care of the latency issue. So those are the cache locations. Now, the edge locations aren't all about cache, but it's mostly about cache. But there are other services around the edge locations. All right, so I hope that explains it. So let me go ahead and get back to that. Now, there's something called the local zones, and there's something called the wave zones. So let me briefly explain what that is all about, okay? So the local zones are for customers who's not quite close enough to any of the regions. So they'll still be suffering from this latency issue, okay? So AWS has done something where they actually bring this AWS resources, something similar to what you see in availability zone and data centers, closer to those specific locations that the customers are kind of far away. Okay? So these are called the local zones. Now, wavelength zones are where you have AWS resources inside a telco, right? So telecommunication company. So you say, oh, well, for what reason? Just imagine something like maybe your iPhone, right? And you have the latest and greatest iPhone technology where you're accessing the internet, very, very fast. Okay. But your AWS resources are still out in the internet. So you may not be able to take advantage of that very super fast telecommunications link that you have with your telecommunications company, because now you have to get out the telco's network into the internet to access AWS. That, once again, is going to add additional latency. So wouldn't it be nice if you could take advantage of this very super fast telecommunication link that you have with telco to access your AWS? And the answer is the wavelength zone. So this is where your telcos, not all telcos, some selected telecommunications companies actually has AWS infrastructure inside their infrastructure, so that you don't have to get out onto the internet. You could stay inside the telecommunications company's network to access AWS resources. You see? So AWS is doing a lot to expand their infrastructure so that there are many, many advantages that you can take and reflect that into your infrastructure design. Okay. All right. So that is the AWS global infrastructure. So, when I first saw that, I was pretty impressed. I mean, they are pretty extensive and they're growing all the time. But the question here is that, well, okay, so I have 32 options for 32 regions. This is where I build out my system. How do I choose from one to the other? Okay. And that is where we're going to be talking about choosing the proper AWS region for your architectural needs. Right? So I'm going to introduce you some criteria that you want to use for selecting one region over another. And here it is. Right? So these are some common ways, I guess, criteria that you would use to choose which one you're going to use. So when selecting it, there's several important decision points. Okay, and these are some. One, latency and proximity to end users. By the way, I actually have some examples of the first three, but let me go ahead and go over just rough details. So latency and proximity to end users. So that is, you decide, okay, who's going to be using my system? Oh, people in Japan. Okay, where are you located? Well, we're located in North Virginia. Okay, so if you're concerned about latency and being close to your end users, you'll probably use region that is closer to your end customers, which is in Japan. So kind of makes sense to use a region in Japan if that's what you're concerned about, okay? But you may also be concerned about cost, okay? It says, okay, so isn't the cost the same all around? And the answer is no, right? So if you're creating, let's say, a server in North Virginia, compared to creating a server in Japan, there's huge, I would say, relatively huge, right, difference in price, because Japan has higher, cost of doing business, right? So managing a data center in Japan is much more expensive, I guess, than managing data centers in North Virginia. I don't know what goes into that, but that's how they work, right? So the cost will be another issue. Service availability. The hundreds of services that are available in AWS, not all is going to be available in every single region, right? Some services roll out from, let's say, North Virginia, slowly but surely, and then eventually, most likely, all the regions will have it, but there's going to be some time delay, so that some regions will not have newer services available. So if you want to use those newer services, you have to choose the region that has those services. And then you have data residency and compliance. So data residency and compliance talk about, it's not about the technology that AWS has to offer. They have these 32 locations available to you. But what if your company says, oh, sorry, we can only build our systems in the United States? Okay, so that's going to be your compliance requirement rather than the technology requirement, such as latency. So you definitely have to honor those restrictions that you have and constraints. And then inter-region data transfer cost. So when you're looking at the cost, if you stay within the AWS region, some activities are not charged and some activities are charged. But if you have, let's say, systems within AWS that are spread across multiple regions, then getting out of the one region and getting into another region usually do incur costs. So you may want to reduce that cost by putting everything into one region, right? So that would be inter-region data transfer costs. Okay. Now, I do want to actually show you some examples of the first three: the latency, the cost, and service availability. Okay, so let's go and take a look at that. So choosing AWS region based on the latency and proximity to end user. So the question is, where's the end user and what is the latency that's involved, right? So I'm going to move into my slides right now. So let me go ahead and switch that. Hang on. And called the Connection Health Check. It's offered by AWS, and the link is in the slide. Okay, so let me refresh this right now. Okay, so this is a connection health check that's actually giving you, if you look at it, at the top are the regions, right? So US West, Virginia, Sao Paulo, Frankfurt, Island, etc. Right? So it has all these. They don't actually have all the regions, but they have the major regions. Okay. Then they have some speed ratings. So for me, right, so you have to kind of understand, where am I checking this from? So I'm pretending to be the end user, and mine says from where I'm at, okay, West Region, Oregon will be the best place. It's the closest region where it's giving me a very acceptable place. So it gives you a recommended region. Now, if I were to use US East, which is North Virginia, says, well, it's acceptable. But if you look at the round trip time it's like more than twice, right? So it's double, okay? So this will probably give you a good bird's eye view from the user's perspective, what the latency is. Now, this may be okay, right? If I could probably just do North Virginia, still be okay, depending upon the use case. But if we're looking for something that's pretty time sensitive and latency sensitive, then yeah, North Virginia probably will not be a good choice if I were to be the customer. Okay. So the next one that I'm going to show you is about cost. Okay. So as I mentioned, services cost differently in different regions. So let me get to that page just a moment. Let me get to the costing page. Okay. So there is something called the AWS pricing calculator, which I just switched for you. This will give you some ideas as to, okay, so what are the real differences in cost? So let me go into the cost estimator. So just a moment. Let's see here. I'm going to go create the estimate. Here we are. And I'm just going to pick something simple, okay, like a virtual machine, and I'll compare two locations. I'll compare the North Virginia, and I'll compare Tokyo. Alrighty. So as a region, here we go. As a region, I'm going to choose North Virginia. Okay. And the service, I'll say EC2. So that'll be Amazon EC2. Okay, so here we go. I'll say configure. That'll be a virtual machine. Alrighty. I'm going to pick pretty much all the defaults. So, Linux, number of instances, 1, and the size. Yeah, just go ahead and pick pick the smallest one. There you go. All right, so like I said, I'm going to keep everything the default. And this is telling me how much it would cost, $49. Okay, so that's monthly cost. Okay, so $49 if I'm actually running this system. Now, if I were to change one thing, that is, I'm going to change the region. I'm going to change it to Tokyo. So here we go. So here's Asia Pacific, Tokyo. Here we go. Everything's the same. Okay. And what do I have now? The cost. $73.58. Okay. All right. So not quite twice the amount, but pretty close. All right. So I hope that kind of shows you, okay, I better see when I'm architecting these things, how much is it going to cost in different regions, and kind of balancing out with the latency, right? So you have to choose. I mean, companies usually have priority one over the other. So there you go. So this would be some data that you can use that's related to regions and the costs. Now, the third one I want to show you are the available services, right? Remember, I told you that certain regions have certain services and not the others, right? So let me see if I can find that for you. So hang on here. Let's see. Hang on just a moment. Let me get that link. See here. Yep. So let me put that in a slide. Here we go. All right, so this link is also in the slide as well. So AWS services by region. Okay, so if I were to go to North Virginia, okay, so and you have list of services. Okay, then let's say if I would go to, say, Tokyo, right? Now, I can't really tell which one is lacking, okay? But if you know a certain service that you want to use and it's not here, then obviously it's not here, right? So if I were to say, let's see, in Tokyo, I'm trying to think. Let's see here. I don't think they have the Deep Racer. So let's see, we go to Deep Racer. All right, so we're looking at Deep, data sync, database migration, Deep Lens, Direct Connect, Direct Service. Yeah, those things are there, right? So let's see if we have it in North Virginia. Okay. Okay, so now you see there's Deep Racer there, right? So Deep Racer was not there in Tokyo, but it is there in North Virginia, right? So, know the services that you want to have and make sure that service is available to you in that region that you've selected. By the way, Deep Racer is one of the machine learning services that AWS offers that is a example of a reinforcement learning, just that you're interested. All right, so I hope that gives you some ideas as to, okay, which one do I choose? Well, these are some of the criteria that you would choose. All right, so let me go ahead and get back into the slides right now. So hang on just a moment. Okay, so now I'm back in my slides, and this is where we left it, right? So just as a reminder, so the way you choose which region out of 32 that you have right now is one, latency related to end users. Sometimes you look at latency related to where your developers are, right? So, whoever the end users are, either being external end users or internal end users, latency will be the issue. Cost, right? As you saw, service availability, residency, compliance, and inter-region data transfer cost. All right, so, and in the slides, I do have all the pages that I explained for your latency checker, your calculator for the cost, and also the service availability. Okay, so this concludes the first half of the webinar. So let's go and take a 5-minute break. I'll see you back in 5 minutes. Thank you.
Sure, we are now going to take a 5-minute break, but before we do that, we are going to launch a quick poll that we want to invite you to participate in. Doing so helps us know how we can better serve you by telling us who might be interested in more information or in taking some additional training. In addition, we have a lot more informative webinars coming up, so please go to netcomlearning.com/webinars in order to register.
Okay. All right, everyone, welcome back. So now we're going to pick up the latter half of the webinar for today. And the first topic that we're going to cover is S3 and Glacier, right? So familiarity with Amazon Simple Storage Service, which we call it S3, and Amazon S3 Glacier. All right. So the reason why we're talking about this is because I'm not sure if you know, but one of the first services that AWS actually launched was S3. So it's been around since the inception, pretty much, of AWS. And it's very much a foundational service for a lot of us that's using AWS. So it's good to know. And by the way, we're going to be doing hands-on on this. So here we go. So let's get to know what S3 is and what S3 Glacier is. So here, this is very much an overview statement, and I do have more details on the following slides. So S3, highly available, scalable, durable, secure, all that good stuff. The cloud storage service. It's actually designed to upload and download very, very large files, right? And we call these things objects, by the way. And in general, these things that we upload and download are referred to as objects and or blobs, right? So blob, no, it's not that green slimy thing. It's a binary large object, right? So that's the acronym for that, okay? So S3 really doesn't care as to what type of file that you're going to be uploading. And we'll be talking about other concepts in S3, but we'll kind of keep it to now. So in general, S3 is called the object storage because it stores objects, right? Like blobs. Now, what is S3 Glacier? Glacier is actually within the S3 family of storage services, but it acts very differently from a normal, what you consider other S3 services, because S3 Glacier is really specifically designed for long-term archival needs. So that is something that you need to, let's say, store for months and years, right? Maybe for compliance reasons. Maybe you have financial compliance regulation that says, hey, we have to keep our records for the next 5 years, right? You're not going to be accessing it as much, maybe not ever, but you need to have them just in case, let's say for audits and such, right? So that would be Glacier. Okay, so Glacier, you probably know, is like slow moving ice river, right? In real life, but in AWS, this is something that, doesn't change. You don't access as much, and it's very, very rock bottom prices when it comes to storage. So let's go a little bit more into S3. So Amazon S3, once again, is an object storage, but here are some of the components, right? So the S3 service consists of you creating buckets, right? So buckets are things that you place objects in. Kind of easy to understand, right? So you store it in a thing called the buckets, right? And then the files or data that's inside these buckets are called objects, also known as a blob, right? Binary large object. Now, durability is measurement of this S3 service where it measures what happens when systems go down, right? When systems go down, let's say S3 system goes down, will your file also be lost, right? And durability means no, okay? There's something called 11 nines of durability. That means chances are when something goes wrong, even with S3, your file will not be lost. So your data is extremely safe from loss. Not to say zero, possibility of loss, but high probability that your file will not be lost. It's called durability. And then accessibility. So data in S3 is you can access it from anywhere, any place, any way you access it. Okay, so that means, and you can also control access to the public, not to the public, to certain people, right? So you have a very good, fine, granular control over the access to your data. So that's S3. Okay. Compared to that, we have Glacier. So Glacier, instead of buckets, they have something called vaults. okay? And instead of objects, you have things called archives. So archives goes into vaults, okay? Now, the major difference between the two, we'll go over a little bit later on, but the retrieval time is going to be pretty slow compared to the regular S3, okay? Because look, the assumption here is that you're storing something for a long period of time that you're not going to be accessing as much. That's why it's cheaper. So if you want to access it, well, you know, there is a downside to this, right? It's going to take time to retrieve. Cost efficiency is like lowest cost storage, right, ever. So if you have something that you need to store that is for long term, this will be a great service for you. And then there's something called Glacier Deep Archive, because there are different flavors of Glacier. The Glacier Deep Archive is the most cost-effective version of Glacier, right? For data that's going to be remaining dormant, that means you're not going to touch it, right? Let's say, you know, for a long, long time. So retrieval from Deep Archive, though, is typically takes around 12 hours, right? So the moment you say, hey, I think I'd like to have that server, that data, yeah, wait like half a day, and then yeah, you get the first bite of that information, right, in 12 hours. So there you go. So then what I want to show you next is the comparison. Okay, so Amazon S3 versus another family of S3, which is Glacier. So I have like, you know, 6 things here, okay? But let me cover, let's say, first 3, right? So rest of it, you could take a look at the slides later and see for yourself. So when do you use S3 versus Glacier? So that's the use case. So with S3, it's for general storage, right? Normally with frequent access, and you want very fast response time. Well, that's S3 for you. But with Glacier, it's a long-term archival, infrequently accessed data. Okay, so the frequency will be different. The next one is accessibility, right? So with S3, it's near instantaneous access. It's very, very quick. But with Glacier, well, it depends on which Glacier you choose, but your access would be minutes to hours. Remember the 12-hour thing for the, you know, the deep Glacier, okay? All right, so the accessibility and the retrieval time is going to be different, and the cost will also be different. So S3, it's a higher cost per gigabyte considering the immediate access, right? Because you have that fast access, it's going to cost you more. But with Glacier, cheaper storage, but with the potential retrieval fees if you are going to access it. So there's no retrieval fee per se for the standard S3, but for Glacier, there will be retrieval fees. So you really do want to make sure that you're putting data in there that you're not accessing as much, because they're going to charge you for that. And then, you know, you have the rest of the differences. So there you go. So that's comparing S3 versus Glacier. Okay. All right. So now the next slides that we're going to go into is actually the hands-on lab. And we're going to be doing hosting a static website. Okay. And then you'll see why we spoke about S3. Okay. So here we go. So let's go ahead and get into this section, which is hands-on lab hosting a static website. Okay. So I guess before my talking about here, let me kind of explain that in general, when people say, hey, you know, can you host a static website? Or, hey, can you host a website, right? What does that mean? So let's go into the whiteboard. Okay, so let me go ahead and move that over. So when you say web server, right? Website, I don't know about you, but I imagine a server, okay, that's connected to a network. Because it's a web server, you know, it probably need to be connected to the internet, right? So, so here we are, connected to the internet, okay? And probably have some, I don't know, web server software running. So maybe here, you know, you got the, like a web server. Application running, like, you know, I don't know, IIS, NGINX. Apache. Yeah, just put in your favorite web server application, right? Then you probably have your content, like index.html, etc. Okay, and if you want redundancy, maybe you have a couple of these things, or if you're looking for scalability, maybe you're looking for 3, 4, 5. You know how many copies you may have, but at the basis is the structure. You got the server, you have the operating system, you have the web server software, and then you have your content. Okay, and you could definitely do this in AWS. Yeah, you could definitely bring up EC2, set these things up. You could bring up containers, set these things up. There are many options for it, but the simplest option is the one that we're going to be doing right now. And now I'm switching back, okay, is do this on S3, right? Well, we just talked about S3, and we said that S3 is a object storage service, but AWS has made it so that there's an option that you can kind of switch on to turn an S3 into a web server. Isn't that fantastic? So you actually don't have to set up an EC2 with all this service, you know, like NGINX and stuff. You don't have to do that. S3 will serve as a web server, but there is one caveat. So it has to be static website. Okay, so it'll serve for you HTML files, the cascading style sheets, CSS files, JavaScript files that runs on the client browser. Those are all static files, right? And images, okay? But it's not going to do any dynamic work on the server side. So it's not like hosting a Java application, right, on the server side. That's not the case. So it has to be static website. But a static website, yeah, S3 just makes sense, okay? And let's see how this works. Now, remember, this webinar is all about architecting. So why are we choosing to host a static website in S3? So what I did here was I chose the 5 major pillars that we had on the architecture framework, and then refer back to, okay, so the reason why we're choosing S3 to create this static web server is because for these reasons, right? So for operational excellence, offers serverless, hassle-free setup. So you don't have to set up any servers. That usually means it's a serverless service, right? There are no servers that you have to work with, and it does integrate with other operational services such as CloudWatch for monitoring its health. Okay, so that's the operational excellence part. Security. I mentioned that S3 actually has a very granular access control. So we can use to integrate with identity and access management. And also there's the encryption option to ensure the secure content management and delivery. So that's number 2, security. Reliability, remember we talked about the 11 nines of durability. And 99.99% availability. That means your system will be up and running 99.99% of the time. So once again, that is the reliability to make sure that the website content remains safe, accessible, available, all that good stuff. Number 4, performance efficiency. So it does scale automatically to meet the traffic demand. So you don't have to worry about it. Remember, you don't have to worry about the servers and stuff. AWS worries about all that. So there it is. So doesn't matter if only a few people are coming or massive amounts of people are coming, your S3 will serve your files by scaling its power to meet the demand. And then last but not least, the cost optimization, right? So because S3 is a serverless service, you only pay for what you use. So you only pay for what you use, eliminating server maintenance costs and all that. So it does match all the 5 major pillars of the well-architected framework. So that's why we chose S3 to show to you. And plus, you know, it's a nice introduction to getting something real that you can use right away, okay? All right, so how does this hands-on lab work? Well, there's actually a tutorial on the AWS documentation page. And that's what I'm going to follow to do the hands-on right now. So in the moment, I'm going to switch to my web pages, and I'm going to show you the tutorial. And then I will show you me going through it so that you can go through it yourself at your own leisure. Now, the steps that we're going to be going through are 8 steps. So there you see it on the screen. So first we'll create a bucket, okay? Remember, all S3 starts from a bucket. So I'm going to create a bucket, which is going to, which I'm going to place my web content in, okay? Then I'm going to switch on the website hosting service for the S3. Then I'm going to work on the access control. So step 3 and step 4 are access control, so that S3 comes with the default encryption and default blocking public access. So if I want everybody to access my web page, I have to disable that. Okay. Then I'm going to add something called a bucket policy, which is a security policy for denying certain things to happen. So I'm going to add a special policy to make sure that people do have access to my content. Okay. Then configure the index document, index.html, configure the error document, error.html, and then we're going to test the website and see if it's working. If all's done, we'll clean up. There you go. So that's going to be the lab. So if we're ready to go, let's go ahead and switch the screen. Just a moment, please. Okay, so I have just switched to my web pages, and here's the tutorial page. So the link is in the slide, okay? And this is part of a S3 documentation, as you see. It's a user's guide. And there's a tutorial, and there's a bunch of tutorials on S3. So I'm picking the one that says configuring a static website. So there you go. And I have that page right here. So what I'm going to do is, because I need for you to look at the instructions as well as my working on that. So I'm going to split this into 2 parts screen. Okay. So on the left, I'm going to put the instruction. On the right, I'm going to show you my management console. Okay. So let me go ahead and do that right now. So hang on. Let me move that piece to the left. And let me move that piece to the right. Okay, so I hope this will give, it's going to be a little small, but hopefully you'll be able to follow along, I hope, with your own screens if you want to. Okay, so let's go with that. Okay, on the right, by the way, you see me logging into my management console. So this is my account that I'm going to be using. All right, so let's take a look at the topic. So the first thing is we create a bucket. Okay, so it says there, following instructions provide an overview on how to create your bucket. So let's take a look. To create a bucket, sign in. I'm already signed in. Choose a create bucket, choose the bucket name, choose the region, and then accept the default settings. Okay, great. So that's what I'm going to do. So I'm going to go to the right now, and then from the search, I'll put in S3. Great. So I'm going to put the S3, and here we go. All right, so here is a menu to create the bucket. By the way, you can also go from here and say buckets. So any which way you get to the buckets is fine. And right now I have no buckets, so I'm going to click on create bucket. Okay, so the bucket name, there is a rule to the bucket name. Must be unique within the global namespace and follow the bucket naming strategy. Okay, so here we are. So I'll say, let's see if that's unique. I think it might be, okay. Maybe let me put a number in there just in case. All right, so here we go, netcom demo, website 01. I'm going to choose the region. So I'm going to choose the North Virginia. That's it. And everything is default. Okay, everything's default. So here we go. And I'll say create a bucket. And crossing my fingers that the name is unique. If it's not, it's going to come back with an error. Okay. So looks like it's good to go. So as you can see, there's a bucket now. All right, so step 1 complete. Now let's go into number 2. Enable static website hosting. So as I mentioned, there is an option in S3 where you could turn on a switch and make this into a website. Okay, so let me just go ahead and read out the steps, and I'll do the steps for you. So I'm logged in, buckets. Okay, then I choose the bucket, choose the properties. I'm in number 3. And then I go all the way down to where it says static website hosting, and I choose edit, choose use this bucket to host the website, and I enable it. Great. Okay. Then I have to specify what is the name of my index document, what is the name of my error document. Okay. And if there's any redirection, I'm not going to do that right now, and I'm going to save changes. Okay. Then I'll notice that at the end, when I save the change, it'll give me a URL where I will be referring to this website a little bit later on. So let's go ahead and do these steps. Okay, so I'm on the right-hand side, And then I'm going to choose that bucket that I just created. It's not a website yet, right? Then I choose the tabs. There are a bunch of tabs on the top. I'll choose the properties tab. Then I'm going to go all the way down. These are all these options. I'm going to go all the way down to see where it says static website hosting. Okay, right now it's disabled, right? So I'm going to say edit. Okay, and then I'm going to enable it. All right, so when I enable it, it gives me additional things. I'm not going to redirect, so I'm going to have as a host static website. So the index document is going to be index.html, error document is going to be error.html. So here we go. Index.html, make sure I didn't fat finger this thing. All right, and error HTML. Okay, so, and everything else is fine. We'll come back to this later, but I'll save changes. Okay, so now that I saved my changes, let's go back and take a look and see what it changed it to. Oh, so there it is, static website hosting. There's a lot more information now. It's enabled, hosting type, bucket hosting, yep. And look at that, bucket website endpoint. So there's a URL. So let's see what happens. Let me copy that URL. Okay, I just copied it. And I'm going to open up the page and see what happens. Oh, look, it says forbidden. Ah, okay. So it says forbidden because I haven't really changed anything about the access control. So yeah, the website is there, sort of, okay, without the content, but it's forbidden anyway. Okay, so we have to change that. So let me go back. And let's go back to the instructions. So the next instruction is to edit the block public access setting. So like I said, S3 comes with a very secure settings for security right out of the box. So if this is going to be a public website, we have to open up access. So let's take a look and see what I need to do. So we'll go back to S3 console, look for permissions, right, in the tab. And number 4, under the block public access, choose edit, and then clear all public access and choose save changes. So the security is on by default, so I'm going to disable that. Okay, and that's step number 3. So let's see how we do. So here we go. I'm still in the bucket. Let me just go back just to make sure. All right, so here's the bucket. I'm going to click on the bucket. I'm going to go to permissions tab. Okay, here we are. Then if we look at the block public access, okay, and currently it's on. I have to change that. So I'm going to say edit. Okay, and I'm going to disable all the block public access, and I'll say save changes. Okay, then AWS is going to say, are you sure you know what you're doing? I'll say, yep, I sure do. Confirm. And here we go. And they will tell you, hey, it's off right now. Like, be careful. Okay. All right. So now let's go into step 4. So step 4, add a bucket policy. So now that we've actually made it publicly accessible, let's go back to the page and see what happens here. Remember, it was forbidden. So let's see if I were to refresh this. Okay, it's still forbidden. Okay, but it's actually a little bit different because it's actually saying, look, you don't have any, you still don't have any permissions yet. Okay, so because we have to do one more thing, which is to add special policy to the bucket, which is called the bucket policy, which controls access to that particular bucket. Okay, even though the service is available, the bucket is still not available. So here under the buckets, we're going to go to permissions again. Now we're going to go back into something called the bucket policy, and then we'll edit. Okay, and we'll add this thing right here, which they have kindly put in for us. I'm just going to make a copy of that. Okay, and I'm going to be copying this and then update the resource to your bucket. I have to make sure that the bucket name is replaced with the actual bucket name, and then we'll save changes. Okay, so let's go ahead and see what that is all about. So here we go. We'll go back. We're still in permissions. Okay, but one thing I do have to know is that, let's see. Okay, so there's the bucket name right here, right? So netcom demo website 01. So I'm going to need that a little bit later on, but we're going to go to the bucket policy. So here we are. So we'll say edit. Okay, and here I'm going to copy and paste that thing I got from the instructions, but now I have to update the bucket name. So the bucket name is, hang on here. Let me grab that bucket name. Let's see, Netcom demo website. And replace that bucket name right here. Okay, just to let you know, so this is a typical format for a policy, okay? And the way I remember it is that the policy has something called the EAR. So EAR, so effect, action, resource. So the effect is to allow. The action is to do get object. Get object means to access a page, okay? So access the content. And the resource is my Netcom demo website, website / asterisk. Asterisk means that all the contents inside. Okay, so this should be okay. So let's go ahead and save changes. Okay, so now the content is now made available. I don't have anything in there though, but let's see if anything changes here with the forbidden. All right, so here we go. We'll refresh. And now the error message turns to not found. That makes sense, right? Says, look, yeah, you have access to everything that's in this page, but you don't have any pages. Oh, okay. So the page you're trying to go to, which is index.html, is not there. Okay, sounds good. So the next thing then is we go to step 5. Configure an index document. So when you enable static content, it wants to look at index.html. So here is a nice little index.html. So you just copy and paste and make into index.html, which I've already done, by the way. Okay. And then I save it. Same thing. I'm going to upload that onto my bucket. Okay. And I'm going to do the same thing with the error file, right? Configure the error document. So step 6, same thing. I just create the error.html. Here it says 404.html. I created error.html. And then I'm going to upload it. Okie dokie. So I'm going to be doing step 5 and step 6 at the same time. Go back here. And I'm going to go all the way back to the buckets. Okay. So here it is. Here's the bucket. Okay. Then under the objects, I'm going to upload the 2 files. Okay. So hang on just a moment. Upload. And I'm going to drag and drop. So just a moment, please. I actually created them ahead of time. Yes. Here we go. So the index.html and the error.html. Okay. So error.html and index.html ready to be uploaded. So I'm going to upload them. Here you go. And it says now it's being uploaded. Oh, upload successful. That was quick. Okay. So now you see that there are 2 files, index.html, error.html. By the way, index.html looks exactly like what you see on the instructions here. Okay, I just copy and pasted. And the error.html, I just changed the title, right? And the body. That's it. Okay. All right. So now that I've done that, it says test your website. Okay. So now we're going to go back to buckets, properties, and get the endpoint, which I've already done, right? So on the very first step, when I first create the bucket with the website, I copied the URL. So here, right, it says it was not found. Let's go ahead and refresh. It should go to the index.html. Crossing my fingers, here we go. Okay, welcome to my website. Now hosted on Amazon S3. All right, so now it's working. Now let's go to some place that maybe it will give me an error message. All right, so I'll say, let me put that web page in there. Let's see here. That's going to index.html. So I'll say, random.html. All right, random.html. That doesn't exist. What would I get? I should get an error page. Whoops, sorry, page not found. Yeah, see, that was the page that I created. So that's the error page. Very, very good. So it is working. I'm going to go back to the success. Here we are. And notice how long it took, maybe 10 minutes. I mean, I was kind of talking through it. So if I wasn't really talking through this thing, I could probably create this thing in 5 minutes, right? Maybe less. No, let's not push it. 5 minutes, okay? So notice how it's very, very easy to create a highly reliable, highly available web server that services your static content on AWS. So I'm going to go through the cleanup later. But I hope you enjoyed the hands-on. So let me go back into my slides. Okay, so I hope now you've seen my slides. So this was the hands-on that we just completed, right? And we went through all the steps all the way to step 7. So when you have a chance, try it out. And it's pretty straightforward, okay? So this concludes the content portion of my webinar. Just to kind of review what we did, okay, what we covered here. Let's go back all the way to the front, okay? So here we are, right? Understand and apply the well-architected framework. Okay, so we talked about what is a well-architected framework, and we use the analogy of creating a city, right, as an architect, and we equated that to how would you create a cloud systems and design as a cloud architect. We also talked about the introduction to AWS Global Infrastructure, where I did a whiteboarding for you describing what region is, which consists which has availability zones inside, and the availability zones have a bunch of data centers and all those things. That's where you create your services. Then when you want to service those content, depending upon the use case, you may use some caching locations, which are called the edge locations. Okay. And we also talked about the choosing the AWS region. So there are some criteria as to which region you would actually select. Now, maybe it's based on the end users or latency to you or the end users. Another one will be cost, because all the data centers and regions have different price points for your services. And maybe it has something to do with your regulations, right? With the compliance. If maybe your company says, no, you can only have it in US, then yeah, those are the regions that you have to choose from. And there were other criteria. Okay. Then we moved into getting to know what Amazon S3 is all about, right? It's an object storage service compared to the Amazon S3 Glacier, which is a archival service. Then we just finished talking about the hands-on lab, and I showed you how you can very quickly create a static website hosting using S3 by using its static website hosting properties. Okay, it was pretty simple. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed that content, and now I'm open to your questions. So let's go ahead and go into a Q&A session.
Thank you, Terumi. That was very informative. I know everyone is looking forward to the Q&A session, so go ahead and start putting your questions into the questions panel. And now I'd like to give the presentation rights over to Rimi, our vendor manager, to introduce our promotions and webinar-related courses.
Thank you so much. And once again, a very warm welcome to everyone who has joined our today's session on AWS Discovery Day that covers the topics on Cloud Practitioner Essentials. Now, I would like to take you all through some of our handpicked resources, which we think will immensely help in accelerating your learning journey on AWS. Starting off with a quick overview of Netcom Learning and what sets us apart from the other cloud training leaders. We have very recently been recognized by trainingindustry.com as one of the top 20 IT training companies in the US. Another major driver of our expertise is our 25 plus years of industry presence. We have been able to service over these last 25 years to over 80% of the Fortune 500 companies in both the B2B as well as the B2G space. Now, we just wanted to mention that this session is being recorded. So in case you want to refer back to any of the topics that will be covered during the today's session, we will be sharing the recording with you later on, so you can access the recording through that link.
Moving to the recommended courses, which we think will best suit your learning journey. What you see right now are some of our upcoming training batches on the top courses, which you can register for. The dates have been mentioned, but in case you have any queries regarding the same, you can at any time reach out to our team.
Now, we also have a mix of the most relevant resources, which will help you get a better understanding of some of our other AWS courses. You can access these resources when we share it with you post the event. So we have put together the events, the ones that we have done in the past. So you can always refer to them as per your learning journey that you have right now. We have also put together a blog that covers an overview of mastering AWS DynamoDB. So in case you have any suggestions for us for the topics that you would like us to cover, do feel free to email them to us. Moving on to the AWS skilling program. So this helps you to develop role-based cloud skills, working side by side our champion level AWS authorized instructors who train cloud professionals on the latest AWS technologies and tools. So now as a part of the program, you and your organization both may also be eligible for free AWS certification exam vouchers and extended lab facilities that extend up to 5 weeks after the completion of the training. Now we are excited to also bring to you the AWS Skill Builder, which is a new learning center with 600 plus free digital courses that is built by the AWS experts. This includes the game-based learning opportunities with CloudQuest and team-based competition with Jam. Its unique set of offerings actually include practical real-world and hands-on lab experiences in a live AWS environment. Now, this is something that we personally love because it showcases the effort that the AWS team takes to make the learning as fun and immersive for the learners. Moving on, another big announcement that we have for our learners today, and something that I had given a hint in the previous, in one of the previous slides, is about our ongoing discount fest, which, as a part of which, you can now choose the AWS training which suits your job role, and you can enroll yourself at almost half of the original price. Please note that this offer is applicable only on the course trainings and not on the course certifications, and the last date to enroll for this is September 30th. Moving on, our free AWS e-learning resources follow a self-paced training model wherein you get the liberty of accessing extensive course-related videos that are delivered by the AWS subject matter experts on the go. So these videos cover the availability on the device of your choice. So you can access them from your laptop, from your tablet, from your phones as well. So please feel free to access these free resources and make the most out of them. Additionally, please feel free to register for a demo to get an idea on what our 2-hour private group trainings on AWS entails. Now, these trainings will be delivered by our AWS authorized instructors with an agenda of understanding the different AWS services and solutions, and will be beneficial for you to devise a roadmap as per your team's current learning needs. The Amazon Web Services Learning Needs Analysis, which we also call as AWS LNA. Now, this is a free self-assessment tool that helps you identify your organization's cloud skills gap. That includes the participating employees to complete an adaptive e-survey that takes no more than 15 minutes, depending on the role. The idea here is to come up with a targeted, cost-effective training and certification plan that's right for your organization and addresses the specific needs of your employees. Moving on, we have the Learning Passport next, which is a flexible team training package specifically designed and customized for the number of learners you have. The Learning Passport is redeemable across our entire portfolio, which covers more than 4,000 official courses valid over 12 months. Now we have an exciting solution for you, which is Netcom Plus Learning Subscription that is there for our enterprise customers. So all you need to do here is to pay one time and you get unlimited access to authorized training from top vendors that includes AWS for a span of 12 months, which is 1 year. Currently, we have 3 packages available. You can get started for free with a silver pack, the one that you see on the first block, which allows you access to more than 300 learning modules. You can upgrade to the gold pack for just $199 and access 400 plus learning modules in addition to the silver pack benefits. And lastly, we highly recommend our most popular offering of all and ideal for our enterprise customers, which is the platinum package that can be unlocked if you have more than 10 learners. Now, in terms of the benefits, it gives you access to 400 plus learning modules and 100 plus virtual instructor-led courses across top vendors. So it's a great offering that Netcom team has curated just for our learners. So if you require the details, we will be sharing all the details with you, the links with you. Please take some time to go through them. And if you are interested, we have our team that can that can answer any of your queries that you might have around the learner subscription. Now, in addition to our custom programs, do feel free to also go through some of our additional resources, which are curated, keeping the learner's needs in demand, and let us know learners' needs in mind, and let us know in the comments if you have any recommendations for us with respect to coming up with more such assets. Now, apart from our virtual sessions, you can also catch the relevant updates related to IT and business training through our social media handles. So please feel free to follow us on all for all the latest updates. Now, lastly, the CEO of Netcom Learning is an avid writer, and you can check out a glimpse of his book, which is a practical, actionable guide on how to boost performance, successfully manage change, and innovate more quickly. Thank you.
Thanks so much for guiding us through that information, Remy. And now we're going to go ahead and jump right into our question and answer session. The first question we have is, are there any recommended approaches for managing secrets and sensitive information in an AWS architecture?
Great. Well, thank you very much for that. So this gives me an opportunity to kind of go back into what we talked about today, which is the AWS well-architected framework, right? So let me go ahead and switch the slide right now just to kind of show you that. Hang on. Okay, so I hope you see the AWS well-architected page. Okay, so here we have the security pillar. So because that would be managing right? So managing secrets, right? Sensitive information. So that this will fit right here. So let's go into the HTML. And let's take a look at the foundation for design principles. And I would say the question that you're referring to applies to protect data in transit and at rest, right? So it says classify your data into security levels such as sensitive, as you mentioned, use a mechanism such as encryption, tokenization, and access control where appropriate. So that's going to be the general guideline, but design principle. So then, but what does that mean specifically? So here, now we're going to go to the left-hand side, data protection. We have data classification, protecting data at rest, protecting data in transit. So your secrets have to be protected in all these, right, at rest and also in transit. But let's just take a look at one, right, data at rest. So if we look at data at rest, what do they recommend? But we're not going to go into tokenization. If you're interested, please take a look at it. It's a real neat technology. But in general, as a minimum, you have to do encryption. Okay, so what services gives the power of encryption within AWS? Right. Now, there are several services that you can use, and I'm just going to mention three. So one is called the Secrets Manager. Okay, and I'm just going to quickly show you what these things are. So here, if I go to Secrets Manager, so there it is, there's that service. So the Secrets Manager is where you keep your secrets, right? So you user ID, password type of stuff, and you create a store, the new secret, so that you can keep your secrets in a separate encrypted, well-protected service, separate from your code that actually requires that secret. So the recommendation is never to embed security secrets inside your code, let's say, or in your configuration, but keep it separate. Okay, so that would be the Secrets Manager. Now there is something else called the Parameter Store, which is a service for more of a generic items like configuration items, but the Parameter Store, which is part of the Systems Manager. So here, Parameter Store, right? It's parameters, but secrets are also parameters. So you can keep it here too. And I have a tendency to use Parameter Store more than the Secrets Manager because it's more generic and it's actually no cost. So and it also includes encryption. So I usually choose that. And last but not least, there is another service called the Key Management Service, which is KMS. So if I say KMS, Key Management Service, here it is. So this is a service that actually allows you to encrypt your data in a generic way. So this is all about encryption. It's not really about storing of that, the secrets. sensitive information because that depends upon where you have that secrets. But if you want to use encryption, powerful encryption in AWS, then you need something called the keys. And here is a key management service, which is highly, highly secure. So I hope that gives you some ideas. Now, best practice, though, is make sure that, going forward using any of these services, that you have to keep in mind a couple things. So least privilege. Least privilege is that you only give access to data to the people that really, really need it. Right? So don't give overly permission stuff because that's going to ruin your access control. You have to always audit and monitor your usage, even though you're using the secrets manager or the parameter store or the KMS, you have to always kind of keep and check and make sure that they're being used properly, okay? And also, don't hard code the secrets into your code. Don't do that, right? Because that is against the best practice. It's always good to separate using these services. All right, so I hope that gives you probably more information than you probably are asking for, but I hope that answers your question.
Next question up in the queue is, how can I effectively manage and control costs while designing architectures on AWS?
All right, so thank you for that too, because that also relates to what we discussed, right? So I showed you that in choosing the region, that you select the region that has the best cost profile that you're looking for. But of course, cost isn't the only decision factor that you have to take in, right? But because in choosing a region, you have to choose the latencies and the laws and regulations and all that, right? But cost is one of these decision points. Let me actually flip back to the slides right now, because I think you're on the web page. So hang on just a moment. All right, so to answer your questions about the cost, okay, in addition to what I've already mentioned in the webinar about choosing the proper region, one thing you have to do is you have to choose the right size for any resources that you are using on AWS. So let me give you one example, EC2. So EC2 would be a virtual machine service. Well, when you're selecting a virtual machine, you get to choose, hey, how many CPU cores do I want? How much memory do I want? Do I need any specialized hardware? Do I need CPU, GPU? What do I need? So don't choose the biggest and baddest server, right? Choose the right size. If you only need 2 CPUs, just choose 2 CPUs. Don't choose 4 CPUs because that's going to cost you more money. So it's called right sizing your resources. Okay. Now, once again, on the EC2, and also for the relational database services and other services, there's something called the reserve instances and savings plan. So this is more like a volume discount. So if AWS is like any other, business, if you commit for a long term, they'll give you a very good discount for it, okay? So if you know that you're always going to be using 5 servers, yeah, then reserve those instances. Now, the only downside is that you have to commit to that, how many ever servers that you want for 1 and 3 years, okay, 1 or 3 years. But you get very, very deep discount, upwards of, depending upon what you're looking for, upwards of like, 60 to 70% discount from a standard pricing. Okay. Now, once again, staying with the EC2, there's something called the spot instances. So the spot instances is like a very deep, deep discount on the EC2, the virtual machine, when there is excess capacity on the AWS side. So relatively speaking, if there are fewer customers wanting to use EC2 and you want to use an EC2, well, there's maybe excess demand, excess resources on the AWS side. So they'll give it to you for very, very low price, upwards of like, over 90% off from the standard pricing, okay, maximum. But the downside is if the demand changes, then now there's more demand for EC2 in AWS. Now AWS says, oh, okay, so now there's more people wanting to use EC2. Now the prices go up. So they may come back to you and say, hey, you know that EC2 spot instance that I gave you? Oh, I need to take that back because now too many people wants it. So sorry. And they'll take it away in 2-minute 2-minute warning. Now, AWS does say it doesn't happen that often, but there's always a possibility that your EC2 will be reclaimed. Okay, so make sure that whatever the service you use spot instances for is that you can react automatically to that server possibly going away. Okay, so there are clearly use cases where you can't use the spot instances, it's just too risky, but there are others where you have multiple worker nodes such as an EMR, Elastic MapReduce, where when you lose one server, that doesn't hurt the entire solution, right? So pick and choose the use cases, but spot instances would be one of these options. And for other services, there are similar type of cost savings. So explore into a particular service and look into documentation and see how you can take advantage of these deep discounts. I hope that answers some of your questions.
And finally, last question for today. What are some considerations for optimizing performance and latency when designing for global deployments on AWS?
Great. Thank you for that. So once again, going back into what we discussed in the webinar, choosing, remember one of the criteria for choosing which region was latency. So if latency is one of your major concerns, then see where your users are and use the region that is closest to that end user. But what if you have global audience, right? You can't just choose and say, oh, it's not just Tokyo, maybe it's Europe, maybe it's United States. Well, what do you do in that case? Remember I told you about the edge location, okay? The caching service is called the CloudFront, and you can use CloudFront to deliver content to wherever is the closest to wherever your end users may be, right? So if your content is cacheable, that is, it's compatible with caching, then you would definitely use that. Now, if another option is to use a multi-region deployment. So you say, oh, my customers are divided between Asia and Europe. Okay, then perhaps use 2 regions. So you use the Pacific region and European region, that you can do as well. Now, there is a service called Route 53. So Route 53 is basically a DNS service, domain name service, but the Route 53 actually has additional power of something called latency-based routing. So if you have systems in multiple regions, and if you put a Route 53 on front of it, then depending upon the latency to that user, Route 53 will direct your request to the lowest latency location that it knows, right? So that's another way of reducing latency and optimizing performance. Now, there are other strategies that you can take. For that, please come on over to the Architecting on AWS. We'll be talking about those kind of things. By the way, for those of you referring to the earlier question about costing, there's actually a course just for your financial professionals as to what the cost structure is on the AWS and how you can reduce the cost. So, come on over, and I look forward to seeing you in those classes.
Once again, I want to remind you that as you leave this session today, you will be presented with a short survey. We would like to request for you to help us by taking a quick moment to participate in that survey. Your feedback really helps us understand your learning experience as we are constantly looking at how we can improve our future sessions. The survey answers are measured on a scale of 1 to 5, 5 representing outstanding and 1 representing poor. We want to thank all of you for joining us today, and if you do come up with any additional questions, feel free to send them to webinar@netcomlearning.com at any time. We hope that you found today's webinar informative, and we look forward to seeing you back here with us soon. Feel free to tell your friends and colleagues about our webinars and other courses. Have a great day, everyone.